Perfect. And before we talk about year 12, do you just want to give like an insight into what you do specifically in those A levels? Like what kind of things do you do in history? Or actually, what's the hardest A level for you?
Oh, I'm gonna have to go with history. I think so I do the AQA course, and in the AQA course we cover industrialization in Britain from around 1760 until 1820. And then in the American course we basically study from the War of Independence until the Civil War. So it's about 100 years for each part of the course, plus coursework. And I think the main reason it's so difficult is just the sheer amount of content that you have to cover. And it's not just content, but also you need to structure it in such a way that the exam board likes. Otherwise, you won't necessarily get full marks. So it's like content and a bunch of structure. And I think that's definitely my most difficult level. Yeah.
Cool. So I think the main premise of where we should start actually is when you were heading into year 12, it was quite different from you for you because you guys had a bridge week after you finished your GCSEs, and then you didn't really have like the summer that we've had, for example, because obviously COVID was just at a different space. And then how was preparing for year 12 and like the end of the summer? Was it like difficult because you hadn't really like um seen it in the last year because obviously the first year of COVID had just been passed, or was it a bit easier because of the bridge week?
I think the bridge week gave everyone a lot more clarity as to like what A level would look like because obviously year 11, year 12, there's a massive step in terms of responsibility, but also in terms of the not maybe not the difficulty definitely of your subjects. So we had I think 2 weeks of just basically year 12, but it was like in the middle of like in the end of June or early July. And we were basically just having our lessons as normal and seeing how it was. And I think at least I remember at least like 10 or 15 people changing A levels in that week. So it definitely avoided that whole rush at the beginning of the year for everyone realizing I don't really like this subject and I want to change. In terms of like shifting from year 11 to year 12, I think they definitely ease you into it. I think the first half term or so is definitely quite relaxed, and then they ramp it up a bit more in the second half term and onwards. I'd say the main thing is learning how to manage your free periods because there's like that whole time in year 12 where everyone's like getting these free periods and they're so excited because they're usually having like 7 period days. And now they have like, I don't know, 2 or 3 periods, 3 periods a day. They know what to do with themselves, end up spending the whole time in Joe's or like mucking about in the common room or something. And basically learning to manage your time in the free periods is definitely one of the hardest things because it's like being able to be to your friends like, no, I can't hang out. I need to get some work done in my freeze. And then being able to just come home and relax because that's really underrated and needs like if you get it done early, it's so much easier.
So you said in terms of managing your freeze, so how difficult has that been for you personally? Like in terms of was it a bit of a struggle, saying no, guys, I can't hang out, in the start of the term, or did you kind of just sort of let it happen naturally to the point where you're like, okay, hang on a second, I actually need to do work now in the freeze. I can't just like sort of slack in that point. How was that like journey for you?
It took a while. I started realizing that with the sheer number of extracurriculars I was doing, like with band and with orchestra, and then with drama as well, I couldn't rely on coming home after school because I was getting home at like 8 or 9, and I'd have to have dinner and then get ready for bed in order to wake up for the next day. So that's when free periods become really helpful. And I kind of got to, it must have been like the second part of half term and realized like, oh, okay, I actually need to do freeze because I can literally tell you what I do. I'd like basically see what some of my friends were doing. Um, and if we were going to the library, I'd go to the library. If it was Joe's, I'd go to Joe's. A lot of time was spent in the common room. A lot of time was spent like, yeah, getting food from Joe's or just like, I don't know, doing something else in the library. And basically you need to kind of get to that point where it's like, I now have work to do and I'm not going to have other time to do it. So I need to get it done pretty much as soon as possible. Because with year 12, if you just get everything done like as soon as possible, you're set. And especially because it's so important to have such a strong start. predicted wise as well, because a strong start means that you're more likely to get high predicted anyway. So it's I definitely feel like I should have spent more time like kind of knuckling down in the library and getting my work done as opposed to just going to Joe's. So yeah.
So with that, do you think then like approximately like 75% of work should be done at school and then like 25% of work to be done at home? Or do you think it's more like 50-50? How would
I think well honestly it really depends, because a lot of people I know have 4 A levels, which means it's more difficult for them to be able to have time to actually use a free period to study, seeing as they get so little free periods. I'd recommend, I don't know if I can put a percentage on it just because it depends how productive you are, but I'd say a good 50-50 balance is definitely important, like 50, like half at school, half at home. I know some people who just get all their homework done at school in their freeze and then just go home and chill or do whatever they need to do, because that chill time is really important. The step between A levels and GCSEs is one where I can't revise the day before an exam and expect to get good marks. GCSE, it was very much lax, as in like you were kind of just seeing the tip of the iceberg for that subject. Whereas this one, if I have a maths test tomorrow, I need at least like 4 or 5 days of prep before I go into that test. Otherwise, I'm not going to get above like 80%, for example. So making sure that you're spending a good amount of time at school doing your work, coming home and doing a bit more, and then being able to wind down for like 2 or 3 hours is invaluable and definitely should be aimed for.
So I think it's important for everyone at home to understand that obviously when you were talking about your journey, in the sense that at the start you were getting home for like 8 and then you had to have your dinner and then wind down for bed and whatever, and it was quite a hectic and intense cycle. How did that take an effect on your mental health? Because I think that's something, especially in the last few years, which is going to be a very big topic for all of our years, like my year, your year, when we start. Like, how does our mental health get affected by it? So if you don't mind sharing, like, how was that for you personally?
Yeah, mentally it was quite difficult because I was coming home late and I didn't mind it too much because I was doing something that I loved, whether it was drama or music, like my passions. I was always getting home late, but I was doing something I loved, so I was really happy. But in a school environment, there needs to be a balance, and I did not have a balance whatsoever. So whilst I was really happy in this drama and music atmosphere, I was incredibly unhappy and kind of upset with myself because I wasn't doing as well as I could have or should have academically. And having that balance is so important because it also means that your head is quite balanced as well. It got to the point where I was genuinely considering like not doing my passions just so that I could bring up that academic part. But it was more that I wasn't spending enough time in freeze doing all of that, and therefore it was being affected. Like I remember there was a concert we were doing, and I had a math test the day after. And I asked for an extension, and I wasn't given one. But I knew that like a week before the test, and I only really started revising like a day or two before, which was awful. And I didn't get the grade that I definitely could have got had I revised more. And I think that definitely took a toll on mental health because it was like, I mean, I'm here to also do well academically, and I'm not really succeeding in that regard. And it was very difficult to kind of cope with that. And when you're seeing a lot of other people getting the grades that they need to get, and you're kind of just not doing the same, it's quite difficult to manage. And it took like properly timetabling my life when I got home and when I also got to school for me to kind of bring that up. And I'm not necessarily saying that getting academic validation is the thing to make your mental health get better, but definitely having a balance, whatever that means, whether it's fitness and academics and music, or whether that's just doing something like maybe for an hour a day that makes you happy. But having that balance is so necessary in order to have good mental health. And once I got there, it was so much better.
Okay. So you talked about like almost coming down from having a poor mental health to having a much stronger one. So would you say you have any particular tips other than timetabling to approach learning or to approach working more in a more balanced way?
I mean, this might not work for the essay subjects, but I mean, to an extent, having some sort of yeah, I'd say having some sort of music while you're studying would make you more productive. I know when I have music in my ears, it makes me a lot happier to work and being able to. Obviously, you can have music with silence. I prefer music with words. That definitely made me more productive and definitely helped me with my mental health. I think another thing that isn't timetabling is, yeah, I'd say having a hobby of some sort. Like my hobby was obviously drama and all of that, so I wasn't too fussed, but just having like an hour of doing something by yourself is also really important, whether that's, I don't know, doing some yoga or some meditation, whether that's working out, but just some alone time to be with your thoughts and collect your thoughts and gather, and it's definitely really important. I think also limiting time on your phone, like,
Yeah.
does wonders for your mental health, because we're in such a generation like with so much technology. It's like kind of in our face all the time. You wake up, you check your phone, you go downstairs, maybe watch some TV, do some stuff on your computer. Having that time, just whether it's being around people, whether it's winding down and reading a good book, whether that's, I don't know, taking care of yourself, having a self-care day, as long as you're doing something away from the screen that is beneficial for you, then I'd say that's really important and should definitely be done more.
I'm really happy that you said actually reading a book, because from what I've seen from your year and the people that I know just like generally who have like either doing their A-levels or have completed it, reading seems to be a skill which has to be perfected, especially because of the depth in which the subjects you're studying. So I genuinely believe that if you can actually like get back into reading, because I know that when we're younger, like reading is like one of the most fun things to do. For me personally, it was. I didn't start watching TV till I was like 7, because I was just reading books. But then from like 8 to probably 12, 13, I just didn't read at all. And it's really interesting because I really still enjoy it right now, but I don't know how I fell out of love with it. So I think for you guys at home, it's really important that if you can get back into reading, even if it's like just doing 2 to 5 minutes a day, just to get it started and then build that habit of reading before you go to bed or whenever you can during the day. I think it's really helpful and really beneficial, because reading is something where you learn a lot just by reading. It could be a fiction book, or it could be a non-fiction. It could be about a certain topic, or it could be even to do with your subject, but just a bit in depth, out of field. I think reading is probably one of the best strengths that you can have just to calm down and also relax. I don't know what you guys would say about that.
I
I
would agree.
100% agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the phone drove me away from reading, because I remember before having a phone, like what would I do in my spare time? I would read, and then I would just fall in love. I fell in love with books, and I would literally be reading for like 3 hours a day, 4 hours a day. But that stopped once I got my phone. But I think just to go back, and then I started reading again slowly. But I still haven't got to reading 4 hours a day. But I don't have 4 hours a day when I can do something. But yeah, I think reading is just really good, and it's beneficial because rather than being on social media where you're constantly seeing up to date things of people's lives or people are constantly surrounding you, it's like what Abim was saying earlier, you get your alone time or your me time just to think by yourself.
I think there's alone time, and it's really important for you to sort of check in. I think that's why alone time is so important, is because you check in with yourself, and then you could sort of understand, okay, yeah, this is how the day's gone. This is how I can react to it. This is what my process of it is, and this is how I can better prepare for tomorrow. Or it could just be as simple of, okay, cool, I just need to get these thoughts out of my head. I need to release this either like negative energy in either a productive way, or just release it. That's why working out for me is so important at the start of the days, because if I have any negative energy left over from the day before, I can just release it before I start my school day essentially. That's why I go to the gym before school and I meditate before school. But that's just a few things that you can do. I think it's really interesting that the conclusion that we could sort of like derive from this conversation right now is, it's not necessarily the volume of stuff that you're doing that sort of leads to the poor balance or something. It's sort of how you manage your time in those like things. So for example, I'm planning to study 4 A-levels. I know Anirudh, you're planning to study 3. And then obviously we've both got quite busy lives outside of the classroom anyway. So it's not necessarily the volume of stuff that we're doing, but it's how we're managing that alongside all our other stuff that we've got our fingers in, that's what's going to actually determine how our mental health plays out throughout the year. I don't know. What would you say to that?
Oh, I'd say I think doing 4A levels definitely forces you to have good time management regardless, because you have so many deadlines and so many classes. It would like be foolish not to like manage your time in such a way where you're literally missing all these deadlines and not being prepared for these classes. I know plenty of people who do 4A levels who are so much more organized than people who do 3. I do think that definitely time management is the most important thing you can have in year 12, because year 12 and honestly sixth form as a whole is that weird place where you're transitioning from one part of school to a whole new world of university. So you're going to be doing exams, classroom work, learning your A levels, and then also preparing to do university admissions as well. And doing that, whether you're doing 3, 4, 5 A levels, is going to be a tricky task. So having that time management, regardless of the volume, is always really important. And as long as you're managing your time well, it is like you'll be absolutely fine. I know what works for me is having a checklist. So what I do whenever I need to do some revision, I feel like timetables are quite difficult for me in terms of being like, okay, at this time until this time, I'm going to do that. Because when I get home, anything can happen. Like I could be asked to like make dinner or do some chores, and it's like, okay, that I need to account for that. So instead I put just timings. So maths for an hour. And then once I do that, I tick it off. And literally having some sort of way to tick off a task that you do is so, well, for me, at least, it's so important and so nice to see that I've been able to get something done and I can tick it off. And when you get to the end of the checklist and you see everything ticked off, oh my gosh, I get so happy. Like it's such a little thing, but it makes me so happy just to see that I was productive. I feel like a lot of people are like, it's so easy to get lost in your phone, like so easy. I find myself sometimes scrolling down on whether it's Instagram Reels or TikTok or YouTube Shorts for like over an hour, just looking at the same like videos over and over and getting lost in that world. And sometimes, like my dad said to me, they're like, imagine if you spent that time doing something productive, how much better you'd feel. Because I don't know if anyone necessarily feels better knowing that they should be doing work and they're on that kind of platform just scrolling mindlessly. And I think it's really important when you have a checklist and you're ticking everything off. It feels so much better than it's so easy to scroll and it's so much more difficult to do work. But if you get past that like kind of barrier of difficulty, it does wonders for mental health.
But that's what it is, right? It's that small reward of, okay, cool, I finished this whole list. And that's what keeps you going. Like that's what will keep the discipline and the motivation. It's knowing that you have that small reward, that small bit of happiness that you just get from like being like, yeah, calm. I've done all of this. Now I can move forward. So yeah, no, totally agree with that. And I think we'll get onto university and UCAS applications and everything a bit further on in the conversation. But an interesting thing to note is when you were going through this journey, who helped you the most? Was it more self-discovery in terms of all these techniques and all these tips that you found, or did school help you, or did your parents, your friends? How did that work?
The thing about year 12 is that because there's so much independence, you kind of feel like you have to do it alone. For me, it was like, okay, I'm struggling. And my parents like clocked it early and they were like, you need to seriously like rethink a few things. You need to make a timetable, you need to do this. And I think having some sort of mentor, whether that's a counselor, whether that's a form tutor, head of year, head of house, etc., you need someone to kind of ground you and give you advice because they've been in your shoes before. I think for the first half term, I thought I could do it by myself. I don't need to go to math support. I don't need to ask my teacher for help. I can do it by myself. I know I can. I'll just look at their feedback and continue doing it. No one is a mountain. And these A levels, especially, you're going to need as much help as you can get because you're transitioning from GCSE, which is difficult in a different way.